we're in a emergency situation here.
Right. So how should we start? Welcome to Talking in the Chasm.
Yeah, welcome to a very special episode. Talking in the Chasm, compassionate, controversial conversation between best friends. Holy man.
And atheist.
I'm Felix.
And I'm Matthew.
All right, and we're on for us in Massachusetts, it's day 3 of the zombie apocalypse.
This is our social distanced tick episode.
Yeah, we're social distancing by about 4 miles, I think.
Something like that.
Yeah,
we wanted to get together and show that we were supporting the cause in part.
Yeah. And we should let's talk about the coronavirus situation. It's kind of brought up a couple of interesting things. I saw that Russell Brand did this really cool video, and he mentioned that the coronavirus kind of underscores how interconnected we all are as a world, that this thing doesn't really stop at country borders and language and race and economic, how rich you are. I mean, if you're rich, you can get tested, I suppose, and maybe get better healthcare, but it's pretty unilateral in its affecting people. And that's kind of, it makes you sort of realize that we are one race of, humanity. And it's not just rich people, poor people, or black people, or Chinese people. It's all of us. And this sort of underscores how vulnerable we are and how much and how interconnected we are.
I have an intruder. What are you saying?
I see that.
Okay.
Hi, Cephas.
You want to say hi to Felix? Come over here and say hi to Felix. What do you want to tell him?
Hi, Cephas.
Did you hear him?
I wish I could hug you, but we're pretty far away for that.
Tell him again. He didn't hear you.
I love you.
Aw, I love you too. You're the best. You rock. I like you, polar bears.
Can you do me a favor, glass? Laz, if you can bring me coffee. Thanks. Yeah, that's back to our regularly scheduled, less cute Milioni. I was just I've talked with several different people today. So here's some of the things I've been thinking about. It seems like these kinds of crises, which I don't have anything to compare it to. I don't know, this is unprecedented as far as I'm concerned. I feel like that my sense of the world is that it feels like it did after 9/11, like the world is changing and we don't know how. Like there's something very big in the air. And I think even, it just seems like one of those moments in time that thing you don't get to, it's like a Pandora's box. Like we don't get to pretend like this didn't happen anymore. And we're just at the outset of it. So I think there's so many big questions that are unanswered and how much is going to happen. There's a friend of our community who is on a ventilator tonight in Winchester. So, it's starting to hit home. And I'm still having to argue with people on social media that it's not just a flu, or that it's not media hype, or that it's not a conspiracy by the Chinese or some other stupid thing.
Yeah.
So, but what
I mean, our idiot president, I hate to say that word, but is doing all kinds of crazy backpedaling, because just last week he had a bunch of tweets about, oh, the flu kills 70,000 people a year and this has killed 200. So think about that. And, let's put this into perspective.
Right.
And stuff, this is just because the conspiracy of the left and the Democrats want you to flip out about this. And then, of course, he deletes all those tweets, and now he's all about, I'm the guy that's going to solve everything.
Well, I hope he will. I mean, more power to him. If he can come up with some solutions, I'm all for solutions right now. I think, though, what it shows to me is that it saddens me that when there's a crisis afoot, it just leads to division and separation and a bifurcation. Come here, Hannah. Make your appearance on Tick.
Oh, hi.
Hannah! Hi.
Do you see her little baby bump? You can't tell very well.
My gosh. I miss you so much. I haven't seen you in forever.
We need to catch up sometime. I'm never around.
Yeah, I'm excited for you. Congratulations and everything. Get ready for the ride of your life. Yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, you guys have
water. Anyhow, what I've been noticing is that we have these like divisions that are onset by a crisis. And I think if there's anything redemptive, like as I imagine, let me be very careful to say, I do not think that God created Corona and sent it on the world. I think it's a consequence of a lot of a broken world. But I do think that God has redemptive purposes when bad things happen. And the redemptive purpose is like what you were saying, that Russell was saying, that there's a potential to see within this crisis that every single human is connected. Like a bat virus is now in Boston and California within 3 months' time. Like I can't.
Yeah.
It's everybody. It's everywhere, and the potential. All the potential is there for this to be unifying. For us to have, for humans to have a common enemy for once, where the whole world would come together with a common purpose to save humans. To some like. Slightly less cheesy Independence Day like speech, like let's all unite together to fight the coronavirus, whatever. But it's not that. We just fight. We just separate. And
I don't agree with that. I don't know. I mean, I feel like people are together on this. I mean, walking around out, I went for a run today, and I'm passing people on the streets, and everybody's friendly and waving, and because we're all kind of like under the same umbrella, we're all doing the same thing. We're all feeling it. We're like, oh, I can't come and give you, can't give you a hug because and seeing strangers and dogs are coming up, and I'm petting dogs, and I feel like I'm not seeing it as divisively. I don't feel like that. But
well, you're not on social media as much as I am.
No, I'm not at all. And
you're not as actually connected to Middle America as I am.
No, and my life hasn't really changed that much. I'm pretty much of a shy introvert who sits at home. I mean, my life, the difference between my life now and my life a month ago is indistinguishable. I don't go out anyway.
Except for we have to get online to do ticks.
I stay 6 feet away from people just by like but it's interesting that about 9/11, because I obviously remember it very well, and my daughter was 2 years old, and we watched the towers fall together on television, and I just was like, I'm so sorry about this world that you're getting, that we're given to you now. And a friend of mine said, oh yeah, the whole world's changed. It's never going to be the same after this. And I was just like, what are you talking about? I mean, buildings fall, and we'll build it back, and then everything will be fine. And I guess I guess he's right. It really isn't fine. But I do remember the day after, walking around Boston, It was everybody was quiet. Nobody was talking.
Mhm.
I got on the bus to go to work, and on the bus, just absolute silence everywhere. It was just so weird, and there was this feeling of connection because everybody, you knew what everybody was thinking. Every single person that you passed, every single person that day, we were all thinking the exact same thing. We were all thinking about it. Nobody laughed, nobody talked. I mean, it was just this weird. Uh, this weird feeling that I've never, experienced before or since. This isn't quite so dramatic, but there's a little bit of that, where we're all thinking the same thing. We're all worrying about the same thing. We all, have our loved ones that we're worried about, and so in that way, we're connected, emotionally, as well as just the fact that, this thing's super contagious and it could just go from house to house to house. We all are worried about it, and that's something.
Right. Yeah.
So
I
don't.
sense that too. I think there is the potential still there. It's and I feel that connection in a certain way that you're talking about, but I'm also seeing like Miami beaches full of young kids on spring break, and like farmers telling me, you people, you coastal Democrats are all stupid for believing the media hype, and this war is raging ideologically.
Yeah. Well, I think that I blame politics more than I blame this virus. I
Yeah.
mean, the world has never been, well, the United States has never been this divided. I'm 50 years old, and I've in my memory, never. It's never been like this. The Democrats and the Republicans and the left and the right. I mean, there was little differences here and there ideologically and stuff, but I mean, we pretty much we're in the same boat, and now it's so divisive. And this is just another thing. It just came up, and it's just another log to that fire, another more fuel for this fire of divisiveness that was already there. I certainly don't blame this disease on the country bifurcating.
Right.
I just see people using it as just another volley
Right.
kind of thing.
But I guess my hope would be that this is such a universal human concern that it could roll some of that back, and I'm not seeing that thus far. Maybe it's going to. I think that there's going to, just like we've seen this transition already in Mr. Trump and in a lot of other people that were saying the same things a week ago. I do have some friends who are saying, hey, I thought this was no big deal, and I was saying the same stuff
Right.
flu last week too, but this is no joke. It's something different than we thought. And that kind of, I guess what I would say is that I sure would love to see all of us in the face of this kind of crisis, and let's just call it a potential crisis, because the numbers are still relatively low.
Yeah.
In the face of this kind of potential crisis, it would sure be nice to see a lack of hubris and real humility, and like a real concern, like not fear, not panic, just concern. Like, this is really a edgy thing. Like, we should be slow to speak and quick to listen at this time.
Yeah.
With humanity being threatened with this kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, people aren't going to change their nature, based on exterior influences, regardless of how dramatic,
Well,
selfish people are selfish. What are you going to do? But I want to just briefly talk about this. It was like I read this awesome book about death and disease, like I do. And I wrote down just a few facts about the Spanish influenza,
mm-hmm.
and maybe we can talk about what we think the differences are.
Sure.
But just briefly, because a lot of people don't even know about this, about the Spanish influenza, but it was 1919, right? Yeah.
It started at 18, and it was both the winter of 18 and 19 when it was bad.
Yeah, so right immediately following World War One. So in World War One, 16 million people died in 4 years. That's the entire war. World War One, 4 years, 16 million people. 25 million people died in the first 6 months of the flu.
Right.
And then 100 million people died within 1 year. So that's 5% of the world population died in a year. So it said that this flu killed more people in 24 weeks than AIDS has killed in 24 years, more in 1 year than the Black Death killed in a century. And I read that in Boston, 1 in 4 died because it was such a populated, such a center of mass population, and technology wasn't great as far as hygiene and stuff like that. But when we look at those numbers, how long has this virus been around? This one?
3 months.
COVID?
First patient 0 was probably in November.
Yeah. So, it certainly isn't as deadly as the Spanish influenza. I mean, by now, 12 million people would have been dead in the Spanish influenza. So, this seems to be as contagious or maybe even more,
right.
But it certainly isn't as deadly.
Right.
Which is great. I mean, so I don't know, like, because people are, you keep saying, oh, this is, we've never seen anything like this before. And that's the closest thing that I've ever heard of.
Right.
This influenza epidemic. But I don't know, like, what the similarities are beyond the fact that it's a viral contagion that is airborne. I don't know.
Well, I can tell you one similarity.
And how come people aren't dying from this?
One similarity is that the reason we call it the Spanish flu was because neither the Germans or the Americans wanted to admit how many people were dying on the battlefield from influenza. And so numbers were suppressed on both sides, in the Axis and the Allies. Spain was impartial in the war, and so they were actually reporting how many people were dying, and people thought it was a Spanish problem, just like at the beginning of this outbreak. Right. It was the Wuhan problem, it was a Chinese virus. And so because Spain was reporting more accurate numbers, everyone, there were news articles in the U.S. saying, it's just a seasonal flu, it's a Spanish problem, it's not a U.S. problem.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Well, the interesting thing about here is that patient 0 was in Wuhan, but the Spanish influenza did not start in Spain.
Right. It was just because of that, because Spain
was
the world thought it was a Spanish problem while the world was dying. They just didn't realize it was an everyone problem. Just the Spanish were telling the truth about it.
So I don't know that much about what's going on really, except that there's this, very, very contagious disease that has thus far only killed aged people, really. It hasn't even killed toddlers and babies, which is, usually you're talking about both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
So I don't really understand or, know what we're really even looking at here.
Well, I'm no health expert and no scientist, although we have some doctors in our congregations, but what I have been able to ascertain so far is that, there are other viruses that affect a certain demographic. Like, for instance, chickenpox is not bad if you're young. The older you are, the worse it is. Right. So whereas maybe this is the opposite is true with a virus like RSV, which for neonates and young infants can be fatal. But if you're an adult, it's like a cold. So there are viruses that target that have reactions to certain demographics. Right. And it looks like, from what I've heard about Spanish flu, it was particularly virulent among the healthy, which was what was surprising and devastating about it. Is it seemed like people in their prime who had very well developed immune systems were the ones that were dying the quickest from it. And so I've heard it theorized that some people think it caused an autoimmune response, so it triggered a healthy immune system to attack. And well, it turned into pneumonia. Right. But I'm also wondering, it's interesting that an entire generation of young men was gone. Right. In Europe. Right.
and I wonder, you know, how that affected things, or if it, you know, if it did.
Well, and
But
then
it's just interesting.
The next crop of young men went off to World War II.
Yeah. Yeah.
50 hard years on European males.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
So
what I listened to a testimony of a woman who was 9 years old when the flu pandemic hit. I don't like calling it the Spanish flu. It's a misnomer.
yeah.
In the 1918-1919 flu pandemic hit, and she lived in some rural county, and she was telling the story of her experiences as a little girl in the flu pandemic, and it was horrifying. She said death was everywhere. She said, I used to just go sit by the well and cry. But her family was the only family in her town that wasn't affected by the flu. And she said, we didn't know why, but we felt like God was preserving us. And so her, and I know that sounds weird, but look at what they did with this. Her father plowed like 4 acres of sweet potatoes for his whole town. And she said, the only way that whole town survived was that Papa's potatoes came up, and we fed the whole village with that crop. She said her mother every day cooked a huge pot of soup and sent her door to door to leave a
that's
jar
awesome.
of soup on each of their neighbors' front porches and knock on the door, and then she'd leave and then go pick up the dishes, and they'd do it again the next day. So they took their immunity and served their whole community. And those kinds of stories are just like, it's fascinating to hear what goodwill and care and concern was able to do. I know that I was asking so I've been watching this since early January. I've been watching it closely, actually. And I was asking around what some of the Christian responses were to plagues and epidemics in the past. And there was a weird kind of polarized response from Christians in Europe during the plague. On the one hand, there was this kind of radical isolation and separation. And on the other hand, there was like this fanatical devotion, like people kissing sores and like almost like you saw in Qum in Iran. You know, there were devotees who were licking shrines and saying, you know, God will preserve us, and then licking shrines where everybody touches and saying God's greater than Corona. And those two responses both look like bad responses to me. I would hope that in this time around, the Christian community can have a more even-keeled response where we can be both compassionate to our neighbors and willing to risk ourselves and our health for the good of our community, but also not, you know, this determinist, like God decides if I live or die kind of thing, and using more.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
Well, one is, where do you think that God fits into this situation? I mean, for me, I'm like, well, you know, it was a disease, it was in bats, and then it came, you know, transferred to humans through food or whatever it is, and then, you know, it's a contagion, and we haven't been able to come up with an antibody yet, and yeah, and it's a completely, obviously, a science-based thing. I totally understand how, you know, I mean, you know, basically understand how germs work, how viruses work, and it's just a random thing that happens. It's completely random. It happened, and it's, you know, it's a sickness, and we get over it in the same way that we get over sicknesses, and and that's it. I mean, you know, what do you think about God's role here? Did God send this because he's angry? Is God saving people and not saving other people? Is this what's your take on God's
role,
actual involvement? I mean, is he the clockmaker that is sitting back and just, what, you know, things are happening and we're dealing with it, or is he making things happen and watching us deal with it? Or tell me what you think about it.
Yeah, so I don't think that God made coronavirus as a weapon to punish anyone or anything like that. My initial assessment of the situation starts just like yours. This is just like SARS, just like swine fever, just like bird flu, just like, we've been expecting one of these viruses to cross species and become a huge problem for a long time, at least for most of my life. So the scientific part of that all is what it is, but there's another part to it all, that I think that there's a symbolic part to this. I think that there's something I'm a little reluctant to call it Jungian, but along those lines of something that connects all humans, that has creative potential. What I mean by that is that the mass of all of us, the mass of humanity, is more than the sum of its parts. Are you familiar with Jung at all and his ideas about archetypes and
just a cursory?
He had an idea of universal consciousness. It's where the archetype stuff came from, was this idea that there's something bigger than all of us, or something that we're all connected to. He tells a funny, curious story of working at an asylum in DC, and I'm going to butcher it, so don't quote me on this, but it's something to the effect of, he was working at this asylum in DC, and he came in one morning, and one of the patients, a man who was clinically insane, called him over and said, Dr. Young, come, and he took him to a big window, and he pointed up to the sun, and he said, you see the circle around the sun? That's where the wind comes from. And Carl said that he just said, oh, that's interesting, and dismissed it as the ramblings of an insane man. Well, then he ended up going back home, and a friend who I think was in France had talked to him or written him a letter, and they were decoding some kind of Sumerian text or something that had been buried for millennia. And he had sent him a copy of the translation of this ancient text, and it said to look to the circle of the sun from whence the wind comes, almost exactly what the insane man in DC had just said to him. And it was a confirmation to him that there was something something bigger than that everyone was connected to, that these ideas were bigger than the people who were expressing them, that there was something that we all had tapped into. And so
it was a confirmation that religion is insanity.
Well, it was a confirmation there's something that connects us. You can call it insanity if you will.
Right. No, I'm teasing.
But there's something that connects us. There's something bigger than us. And so the idea of archetypes is consistent with that. Like, that father means more than the person who sired you, more than your relationship. That father as an archetype means something to all people in all places for all time, that's deeply rooted in what it means to be human. Same with mother, and maybe the same with sky and earth and
yeah.
So I think there's something about that idea that's not inconsistent with Christian thought as well, that the way we think and act and behave has consequences bigger than individuals. And so what I mean by that is that if I look for a symbolic meaning of coronavirus, which is a weird question to ask, but what would the symbolic meaning, not the literal meaning, but the symbolic meaning of this be? Well, it's kind of like, it's unknown, right? And it attacks the lungs, the way you breathe, and it's hidden. It's passed without knowledge. And there's nothing you can do to stop it. It's almost like a physical manifestation of anxiety. And if there's any attribute that I would describe the 21st century, is anxiety. It's almost like the human condition is conditioning the physical world. I know that sounds super weird, but I think the symbolic meaning of what's happening with this virus is the diagnosis of what humanity is right now in the world. And so that's one thing, like, to look at these huge issues that are more than just a person, more than just a community, more than a region, more than a country. Like all of humanity is experiencing this. Well, what are we supposed to learn from that? Well, we should learn how to fight this virus. We should learn things that we're learning about social distancing and hygiene and whatever else. But I think there's something psychological to learn about it too. There's something about men that we should learn about it. So that's part of what I think is happening in all this, that is tied to what God is doing in the world. And then I also think that God wants his people to be involved in providing answers and help to people. And so that means different things at different times. I think so we're trying to find right now ways for our community. We're not having meetings right now. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is find older neighbors who we can help by getting their groceries and they're picking up their medicine.
Right. Yeah.
Like that's a purpose that God's people have in all this, to minister to the world around them. And then also I think that this idea that I was talking about at the beginning, like the potential to unify, I think God may want us to see what redemptive things can come out of this. And if there's anything redemptive, it's these ideas that we started talking about, that all humans are susceptible to this. Like nobody can pull themselves up by their bootstraps. This is a community affair, and not just my local community. This is a human community affair. And if God wants us to see anything, it's that, and to reconnect humanity back to humans. Like what does it take to get us to get past our 401ks and our 9-to-5s and our safety and all that? And what does it take? What does the world have to tell us to reconnect our ideas that humanity is valuable and precious and meaningful, and that we need each other and we need to act like a species, not as a person? And all of that's counterintuitive to my culture. America doesn't think that way. I think actually the response, the success that China, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong have all had and even Taiwan in addressing this, it's a demonstration. Like I think that there are certain things that Western culture is really good at doing, like war, empire, capitalism, building. There's a lot of things that, and I don't mean all bad things. There's a lot of really powerful things that Western culture can produce, but there's something that it misses. And there's a lot of powerful things that Eastern culture can produce, and a lot of things that it misses. And this might be an opportunity to learn from each other and to see, okay, well, maybe there's something. And I think actually that's what I'm experiencing among my own people and among my broader community here in Massachusetts, is this idea that maybe we need to consider the whole instead of the individual. Like this virus is tailor designed for that. Like, okay, you're 20, 30, 15, you're going to be fine. You're very likely to get this and not have any problem, but maybe at the expense of killing someone who's 50 or older. Like you can't think about yourself. You have to think outside of self. And if we as a species, as American culture would learn that lesson, we may walk out of this with a net value instead of a net liability.
Well, I feel like that's wishful thinking. Like I said, people's nature is people's nature. Sarah was telling me about people that hoard a bunch of, toilet paper and whatever, hand sanitizers, sell them on Amazon for $50 a bottle. And then when this is all over, they go and they'll return this stuff. And I'm like, man, come on. What, can people really be that horrible? And yeah, they can be. They can also be wonderful, but when you're talking about the symbolic meaning, I just feel like there isn't a symbolic meaning. I mean, that's you attributing something. That's man making meaning out of something that's completely random, has no meaning. You know what I mean? It's like, you can say, symbolically this is what it means, but you didn't really answer the question about God's role. Like, what is God doing about, did God make this? Is he going to cure this? Is he saving some people? Is he killing some people? Is he doing this such that we can learn about the interconnectedness of ourselves? And why did we not know that before? You know what I mean? Do you have a kind of a feeling about that, like in your church and in your community? How is God being spoken of in this, in relation to this virus, and in the way that people are treating each other right now outside?
So I can speak to that from two perspectives. I can speak about Christendom, like what American Christians are doing, and there's a varied response, but there's a faction of Christian thinking in America today that I'm not particularly favorable of. That's like just this kind of like, I think when people are threatened, there's certainly a component of Christian thought that is very conducive for superstition. Like there's a kind of like, Jesus is bigger than coronavirus and God is in control and nobody dies unless God chooses. That kind of thinking of Christian determinism is quite a bit like the Islamic version of determinism, and to the same effect. And I think it's a destructive force. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's actually what the Bible teaches or how we as Christians should think, but it's quite common. And so there's a lot of that kind of like head in the sand, like just pray a prayer like I would do an incantation to kind of like putting a horseshoe over my front door to protect me from an evil spirit. It's that kind of thinking about Christianity. I think there's a much truer and much deeper, much more genuine form of Christian thought that says that what God is doing in response to this is like what Jesus would do in response to this. He would care for people. He would listen to people. He would try to. He may even employ supernatural healing in certain cases, but there's purpose behind all those things. And I think that you're right when you say that talk about this in a symbolic sense, I'm creating a meaning around this. And I think that isn't any less valid. I think it's actually more valid for it. Like to be able to see, so like, okay, if you look at a rock outcropping and you see a face, is it not a face? Is it not, if it's there and if you can see it, is it any more or less meaningful?
Right.
Why it's there?
To a deer, it's not a face. I mean, that humans that's what we do. I mean, we find faces in the clouds, and we invent reasons for why the sun comes up, and we develop religion precisely for that reason.
But those things are there for us to see. Like you're supposed to see faces in the clouds and in the rocks and in the streams, and you're supposed to make patterns out of chaos. Like that's the genius of the human being, that he can see more than just the fact.
Right. No, I do understand the desire to make meaning out of something that feels meaningless, for sure. I mean, and finding a symbolic meaning in all this is beautiful. It's that's great. I'm just saying,
real meaning.
I'm what?
It is a real meaning. Like if you see a face in a rock, it really is a face. Like the fact that it was carved by the wind doesn't make it any less of a face or any less beautiful or less mysterious or less meaningful. In fact, it's more.
Well, it's meaningful to you. I mean, there are times where you go, oh, look at that cloud. Do you see the dragon? And your little child says, I don't see the dragon. So, I mean, it's meaningful to you, but I mean, and that is what being human is. I mean, that we invent stories, we create art. I mean, for sure, seeing ourselves in the rock is an awesome thing. It's definitely part of being human, but it was in response to the question about God's role. Yeah. And not, it's not about, oh, what does this mean to you, and to in your belief of how people are treating each other and stuff. What does this say? because I think, we're in agreement on all of that stuff. I mean, people who are wicked are going to be wicked, and people who are good are going to be good. We're going to see the best and the worst in times of crisis. That's when you shine, in whichever direction you shine. You know what I mean? It's like the bad people are buying toilet paper, selling it for $100 a roll, and then returning it when it's over. And the good people are sheltering in place to make sure that everybody else is safe. You know what I mean?
Right.
But continue about God's role.
So
God
I think I want to finish that, but I also want to push back a little bit on your sense of meaning. Like, so if I see a face on a cliff that's carved by the waves and the wind, that has a discrete meaning to me. But there's two things about that. When everybody sees it and it's meaningful to everyone that sees it, says, "Oh, I'm not." Everybody can see the face of the rock. Then it's meaningful outside of the individual. It's like a message to men. In fact, it could be the fact that a man made it, and that's why we see the face there, like the Colossus of Rhodes. Like, nobody thinks the wind carved that. So we imitate these kinds of patterns for ourselves. But then also, what's the difference between me seeing a face in a rock and me looking at an electronic screen right now and having a conversation with you? I mean, it's two-sided, but your face and sound is being conveyed into some intangible meaning and re-represented here. Why? I don't see that that's much different than nature creating some kind of meaning out of waves and wind and shaping a rock.
Well, here's what I think about that. I know you. I know what you look like, and this is technology is giving me a facsimile of that, and I can see you, and I can say, wow, okay, that's Matthew. I know him. I know that he's not wearing glasses. I know that his shirt is orange. I know that Cephas is on the bed behind him. I already know you, so this is like, it's sort of evidence-based, right? I have evidence. I know who you are. I've touched you. I know you. So the face in the rock, to me, is a delightful curiosity. It's like, oh, that does look like a face. Isn't that interesting? And that's as far as it goes for me. I mean, wow, that's so cool. It looks like a face. Neat.
Yeah.
That's it. There's no meaning. There's no, God put this here to tell us about how strong we are in the face of millennia of wind. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, it's interesting. And that's it. The face in the rock is interesting to me. A carved face and a painted face is even more interesting, because to me, that's like, wow, somebody saw the human, tangible, squeezy face, and then took a rock that does not look like a face and physically made it look like something that it isn't. And that's even cooler. I mean, I know that the wind made it look like something that it isn't, but it wasn't intentional, and it's just kind of a curiosity. You have to put that together. There are certain faces, that are so well done that everybody can see it. But then when there's an intentional, I mean, nobody that I've ever met or heard of looks at the statue of David and says, wow, that doesn't look like a person. I don't know, what are we looking at here? You know what I mean? It's so.
But we took a rock and we imposed meaning on it. We took something out of nature and we made it meaningful. And it is meaningful.
Yes.
It's literally full of meaning.
Right. Okay.
So can we do that with a virus? Can we make a virus meaningful? Can we make a situation in the world meaningful? Just like you take a chunk of marble and carve into it. Yeah, so I'm intellectually carving on coronavirus. I'm saying, here's the shape of what we can see in this, and we can make something out of it. That's what symbolism is.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not following 100% with the using the coronavirus as a medium in the same way that we use marble as a medium for carving likenesses of each other. I mean, to me, it's another random thing. I mean, if your mother gets cancer and dies, it's the same thing. It's just this, it sucks. It's an awful thing, and it happens. I mean, the viruses happen when there's no surprise. Nobody's like, oh my, what? I mean, this, what happens. So I'm not in the same way the face and the rock is like, wow, this is crazy. Wow, this is really contagious. I've never seen anything like this before. Never seen a virus this contagious. I understand viruses, they vaguely how they work and how they're controlled. But I'm just wondering about yeah, did God make this?
Yeah, no, I mean, God is the initial cause for all things. So in a very extrapolated sense, yes, but in the same kind of extrapolated sense that you would attribute matter or purpose to this. So I don't think he meaningfully, like, as far as fashioned a virus as a weapon to kill men. Certainly not. But I think what I think God wants to do is, I think he wants to use whatever is happening that's broken in the world to make things right. And that's the particular genius and ethos of what I think God is doing in the world, is he's taking bad things and setting them in order. He's taking broken things and making them fixed. He's taking sick things and making them well, whether that's physically, psychologically, or spiritually. He wants to set things in order, and he uses people to do it. In particular, he uses his own people. And so when something like this happens, or like a fire, or like a flood, or like a whatever, what I think God is doing is calling on his people to try to redeem it, to make it valuable. See, you and I have an essential difference in that you think people are kind of set in their, if they're wicked, they're wicked. If they're good, they're good. And
no. People can be transformed. I mean,
right.
People do change for sure.
So I think the most common way that God uses to transform people is with the church, with his people, and with his message. I think the scriptures and the message of Jesus and his teachings are transformative as well. But the combination of those two is what God wants to use to change the world for the better. So I think everything is an opportunity for God's people to do that. So we're talking and looking and praying now as a community for how we can do that, how we can be God's hands and feet, how we can be servants to our communities, how we can be transformative and take something that's broken and hurting and make it better. So I think that's what God's doing with this.
And then another question I had for you. I wasn't sure in looking back on our vaccine show if I saw a little change in you. I don't know. But if there were to be a vaccine for this that said, take this vaccine and you won't get it, nor will you pass it along, would you do that with your family?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot, and I've been asked it quite a bit. I don't know.
Well, there was a point in the show about vaccines where you said something to the effect of, you love your fellow man and
right.
You want to do what's right. And I know that you've got things to weigh, the fetal tissue, the whatever, but that's how we live our life. We're weighing every decision we make. It's like, oh, I want to buy this shirt. Was it done by slave labor? How much research do I need to do? Every decision we make comes is a decision. There's pros and cons. But here, it just seems so direct. You take this, you help your fellow man. You know what I mean? I mean, yeah. To vaccinate your family will mean you will not then carry this to another person. Let's say that it were the case.
Sure. So the difficulty is, if that was the beginning and the end of the analysis, then yeah, my answer would be yes. I think that the difficult thing for me is that here we have an emergency vaccine and an emergent issue. And, like I was looking up some information on SARS. This is technically, they call it SARS-2. This is
it is
SARS
SARS
virus. And they were developing a SARS vaccine, and they had it in rodent trials. And if I understand correctly, they had developed the vaccine to the place where it would actually prevent SARS transmission, but it also kind of blew up their lungs, and the rodents died from it, and they abandoned the trials, at least the one that I was looking into. And so, like, the fact that we're going to short circuit we're going to fast track all this and get it onto market as quick as possible, because we're facing this immediate threat, puts it in the worst categories of vaccines. It's not like something that we've been doing for 100 years, like the polio vaccine with a very well-established safety record, and we know how many outcomes are coming from it. It is literally an experimental vaccine, and that puts it in the most fearful category for me, just being quite frank and honest. It's the thing that's the scariest about this kind of treatment, is that it's the least. We know so little about what the long-term outcomes of this potential vaccine would be. So it's scary. I have to weigh it if and when it comes out, to decide what, how do you make sense of that when you don't know? You just have to guess at an unknown.
I mean, at some point, you have to trust in science, or in the scientists. The scientists who make this thing are going to not want to blow up people's lungs. They're going to not, they're going to do the best that they can. And, I'm not a genetic biologist, and I don't understand the molecular level of virus transmission. So if a scientist said, look, we've come up with this vaccine that will prevent the spread. And like anything else in the world, there are possible side effects. To me, if it means saving the people's lives, I would take that risk. If the scientists have said, we've done everything that we can do to assure us that it's safe. If it's something that they would take themselves, you know what I mean? It's like, I have to trust experts. I'm not an expert. I can't become an expert on everything. So at some point, I trust. And that's the same reason, I gave my little babies vaccines. I didn't even know what they were for. The doctor's like, you have to do this and do this. And so I trust you, I trust you.
But I get all that. But the thing that
and I get what you're saying too, and I totally get what you're saying. It's like, if we're going to not be able to have human trials that go on for 2 years, and we're not going to be able to see, then there is more of a risk. Absolutely, I totally get it. And if somebody could look into the future and said, hey, if you vaccinate all of your children, 2 of them will die. Obviously, you're not going to do that. No, nobody would. So there's just no way of knowing. But if for me, if the reasonable assumption is that lives will be saved, and the risk of lives being lost of people that I love is very, very low, then I take that risk. You know what I mean? I just err on the side of I want to help people.
Yeah.
I
get that erring on the side of wanting to help people, but I'm a lot more suspicious of expert opinion. Now, let me say this as a caveat to that. I just spent a couple hours on a Facebook Live yesterday defending expert positions, because there's an unhealthy disposition for conservative Christians to have no trust in experts. And but on this side of the equation, when I talk with you, I'm kind of on that side, because like, for instance, in this particular crisis, I've been watching this since, the first cases were developing in Wuhan in December.
Yeah, I know you have.
And I started paying attention in early January, very late part of December. And I knew enough in early January to begin preparing for something to come to America. And so over the course of months, when we went grocery shopping, we picked up a little extra every time we went. And so by the time that we're in quarantine, I'm not hurting for supplies, and I'm not worried.
Right.
But what bothers me is that, why do I, a dumb sheetrocker watching YouTube videos, know to prepare my house for this eventuality. But the CDC, full of experts, doesn't know how to prepare for tests.
Well, no, they do. They do. And their voices are silenced. I mean, you know, Obama set up an entire, what's it called, office for pandemics that got disbanded with this idiot. And there were scientific people telling him, hey, we got to tell people. And he's like, no, we don't want to cause a panic. We don't want people to get upset. It's just a flu. It's no big deal. He, not an expert, is the one that's giving information. There were definitely experts all along saying this is something big. This is a big deal. We need to prepare for this. It's not a question of when. It's not a question of if. It's a question of when. I mean, I heard that in January also. You know, I mean, experts have been. It's sort of like global. It's a little like global warming. I mean, you know, what can you do? You scream and you shout and you pound your fists, and then people just say, you know, they're going to say what they say. I mean, experts have definitely been warning people about this and saying, get ready.
Right. But what we have at the level of public policy, which is where vaccine production and distribution would happen, is we have a lot of problems, like between a particular expert or group of them who may know very much what they're talking about and the enactment of public policy like vaccine policies. You have a lot of steps where things can go wrong. And so I don't have a blank check of trust for those kinds of public policies. And because I've seen so many things like this happen, it always gives a kernel of doubt in how trustworthy these kinds of big public health policies are. For instance, like it'd be easy for me to pick on Trump here, but if we wanted to go back and pick on Obama, let's look at Fukushima and the Fukushima response. Now, we know that the president of Japan and the president of the United States knew that the reactors were blown the whole time. In public policy, they're telling us it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. Because the job of public policy is to keep people from panicking, because the number one most dangerous thing from a public policy perspective is panic. And so if you have to lie to keep people from panicking, then lie, and lie a lot. And that's exactly what the Obama administration did during Fukushima. And I was on the West Coast, and they had parts of Japan washing up on our shore telling us not to worry about radiation. And I was like, I don't believe you people. And I didn't. I was very careful during those days. And it's all anecdotal, but I know a lot of babies who were conceived at that time ended up being miscarried. I don't know if there's a connection between that or not. I'm not trying to make strong assertions. I just know what they were telling us was a lie, and that was confirmed later.
Right, and that is a perfect scenario of you knowing enough to weigh the situation. I mean, for me, if they come up with a vaccine, I'm going to go to my doctor. I'm going to say, "What would you do?" I mean, you're the one that reads the medical journals.
Well, because at some point, like where we're at now with COVID. Now, we have a known contact who's on a ventilator in Winchester, and I know enough about this virus, about its transmissibility and its case fatality and its potential for serious interactions, that what should happen is that whole chain of contacts and my one removed chain of contacts should be quarantined right now because of that one case. That is not public policy. Erica was just at BCH talking to a pediatrician there about what we should do with Chloe, and that is not protocol. Well, the protocol is wrong. And I know enough. Now I have to think for myself and say, I know that the public policy and its protocol is wrong. So I have to make it based on my own thinking.
The experts would tell you to quarantine that person and everybody once removed. I mean, a real expert would say that. I mean, we were still walking around, everything's totally fine, while the entire country of Italy was on house lockdown. So, I mean, you know, another thing that's just sort of interesting to me about this panic situation, I want to point to one time in history where you told the truth to a group of people and panic ensued, and it would have been better to lie. I mean, people don't panic like that. They just don't. They don't grab their torches and burn down the whole place because they have no idea what to do. Yeah. It just doesn't happen.
Well, a case might be
panic
might be like well, maybe not panic, but riot. Like when the government does something wrong, like, you know, a cop kills some kid, they don't release the body cam footage because they know there'll be a riot.
Oh,
That's a case when public policy will lie to people for the sake of.
that's different. That is a cultural. That's a cultural groundswell. I mean, to me, that is a cultural groundswell that was manufactured.
Right.
That, you know, it finally blew. I'm just saying, you know, they say, oh, there's UFOs in Area 51, and they're not telling anybody because of panic. I think that's the coolest thing in the world. Is UFO awesome? Can we go see?
Right.
I mean, seriously, who's going to panic?
Right.
What does that even mean? So this thing, you know, I feel like there was good people telling idiot people good information that the idiot people were not transmitting. That's how I think this thing went wrong. I mean, the entire world looked at America and laughed. Like, can you believe this? How many people got tested in America compared to how many get tested per hour in South Korea? I mean, it's.
But here's the problem.
It's ridiculous.
Brother, is that
and I don't think it's because of like.
Those same people are going to be rolling out your vaccine. So you're not going to trust them now, but you're going to trust them when they put out a vaccine?
No, I trust the experts. And the experts are the people that you listened to also that said, get ready, it's going to be bad. You know? I mean, you know, you did research, but you didn't come up with the idea that, oh my gosh, this thing's coming to America. I mean, somebody you trust and said, hey, here's the scientific papers. Here's how vaccines work. Here's a graph that shows what it's done in the rest of the world. You know what I mean? It's like, and if those people are the ones that said, hey, vaccination is the way to kill this thing, I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? Because I have to trust somebody. So obviously, it's you know, how do you find that person, right? How do you find who to trust? And then that is just research. And, you know, we did a show about economic materialism, right? And we talked about the fact that we both buy clothing that we shouldn't buy just because it's convenient and it's cheap and whatever. And you know,
right.
And I just did 3 internet searches, and I bought some underpants from Patagonia because I read about how they, you know, and Levi's, how much they donate to whatever, and how, you know, I typed up ethical clothing companies. You know, didn't take that long, and I figured it out because that was important to me. Right. Well, this is important to me, so I'm not gonna trust everybody. I'm not gonna trust the local. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna trust somebody who I know is getting paid by medical companies to tell me that I need to do this. I'm gonna trust, you know, independent researchers who are saying, hey, we need to kill this thing, and here's how to do it. You know what I mean? It's like I understand what you're saying and agree, but I think that you were the expert that you trust to tell you vaccination is the best thing you can do for your family and your fellow man, I think you would do it.
It's certainly something.
My knowing you, I just think you would do that.
And I think that, you know, I tried to make it clear when we talked about that my opinions are potentially shifting on that. Eric and I have been talking a lot about it the last little while. And actually, you know, one of the things that's made the biggest difference, this pediatrician that we just talked to, Erica just talked to this last week, was very respectful and kind about the conversation because we were transferring actually the baby over to care at ECH. And she said, it came up, you know, because it's an intake meeting, so you guys are vaccinating. Right. She was respectful and courteous and wanted to give information and have a conversation, not call us tinfoil hat wearing idiots. And
right.
Erica said, you know, that's what cracks the veneer, at least in our life, is dealing with conscientious people who understand where our concerns are coming from and are willing to talk instead of just browbeat us.
Right. We listening to each other. I mean, that's what it's all about. To me, I feel like medical school should be 90% bedside manner and 10% medicine, because if you can't make people feel comfortable, and then you can't distribute the health care. I mean, it's just not, you know.
Maybe they should work in partners with like a people person and a medical person.
Yeah.
Like Aaron and Moses. Translate.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at an hour and 15 minutes. So we should probably wrap up.
Oh, geez.
We're gonna come to the biggest problem that we have. Like, how do we do a virtual hug now at the close?
I know. We just like a Japanese bow.
Yeah. Okay.
You know. Okay. I love you. I respect you.
I love you. I respect you.
All right.
That's as good as we.
And let's do this again sometime. I don't want to wait too long. You know, we'll just works for me.